independent of the meetings of the learned society? Should there be regional groupings and meetings? Should there be a national centre for postgraduate work on Africa? Where is the funding for field work in Africa to come from? What is the importance of ensuring that undergraduate courses in African studies are given? And I found one of Don Savage's comments particularly interesting. I'll give you time to read it. In essence, he's arguing that African studies in Canada at that time was held up by the public perception or misperception, depending on your view, of the state of affairs in Africa. I would argue that we can substitute some of the countries in this quote, but that general idea is still very much with us today in terms of how the public perceives Africa. The autumn of 1969, as I'm sure others will comment, was a critical time for African studies in Canada. A joint meeting of the Canadian Committee on African Studies in Canada and the African Studies Association of the United States took place in Montreal with a Canadian, Peter Goodkin of McGill, as chairman of the organizing committee. The meetings were disrupted physically as a result of serious dissatisfaction with the African Studies Association of the US, with many American scholars, especially, but not by no means exclusively, those of Afro-American origin. There were deep concerns in the African Studies Association of the United States about government involvement, private sector involvement, information gathering by so-called African scholars, and as a result, the meetings were totally disrupted. People came in and took away the chairman's microphone, and so on and so forth. I've got to go a lot faster, unfortunately. But the Montreal meetings had a profound effect on the future of African studies in Canada. The late 60s were a period of increasing nationalism in Canada, and the desire to maintain an independent Canadian entity, especially in relation to the United States, was very strong. Immediately after the meeting, there was a smaller conference of approximately 15 Canadian academics and 15 African academics held in the Laurentians, north of Montreal. A very frank exchange of views took place, and at least in the Canadian context, there was a determination to ensure that as much as possible we involve African scholars in our research endeavours here in Canada. There was also a strong sense of the need to maintain academic integrity in Canadian universities and to limit the influence of either government or business in teaching and research on Africa. And this was a direct reflection of the problems that our American colleagues were having. A decision was then taken to create the Canadian Association of African Studies. Now, I'm out of time, so I'm not going to go through all of the other aspects that I have in this particular paper, but I have written it in paper form. So if the association is interested, they can have a copy of the paper. I'll just skip very quickly through to show you some of the things. The importance of critical support of IDRC, which in fact allowed the association to grow in ways which were very, very important. We brought scholars in from Africa. We funded African graduate students to attend this meeting. We did a whole number of things. We distributed 250 copies of the journal to all Canadian embassies and consulates overseas. All of this was made possible by IDRC funding. There's part of the Constitution originally, and the voting membership has been strongly influenced by the affair in '69. You will note that the original membership, if you were a government member or a private sector member, you could not be a full voting member of the association. There is membership by discipline, 243 in 1984. There's a distribution by province. There's the distribution by institution. And finally, my conclusion that many of the issues are still relevant to our debate today. In some instances, I see some very positive reflections of those years. For example, I'm delighted to see so many panels here run by African graduate students and chaired by African graduate students. I'm also delighted to see the very strong participation from African scholars in the association's business. That's continuity. But there's some other aspects which we have to give some very serious thought to if we're going to move African studies here forward in the future. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yes, good. Should I go? Avant de commencer, ceux qui veulent une traduction, il faut, les écouteurs sont derrière, sont en haut. Those of you who want translation, you see this gentleman in the back here, he's got the earphones. I'm going to speak partly in French, and my colleague Nathalie is going to speak exclusively in French, and so it might be a good idea now to get your earphones. Your wait a second. You have to show ID to get the, you have to leave ID, yeah. They don't want us to steal the silverware. You know it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So how's this going?
I feel like filling a whole form. Yeah. Put your ID in it, and then they give you earphones and we'll do a simultaneous translation for you.
So, but that's speaking English.
No, because they're speaking French. One woman is going to speak entirely in French, and the guy who speaks next is going to speak partially in French.
So I would plug in the assets.
Yeah, and then the woman in the booth over there is doing the translation, I think.
Okay. Let me see.